Every person who goes to a church should walk away saying, when I was there today, I saw Jesus. They should not walk away saying, that's a great pastor, or that's a beautiful piece of music. Those things are all fine to say. But if they come away and they did not encounter Jesus, the church has failed. So yeah, there's one place, one person to go to, it's Jesus.
In a world where many are deconstructing their faith, what can we learn from studying the causes rather than judging or just ignoring the issue? Listen as we answer this question and more with Scot McKnight, a New Testament professor and prolific author of over 90 books. His latest book, Invisible Jesus, a book about leaving the church and looking for Christ, co-authored with Tommy Phillips, tackles the deconstruction movement head-on, viewing it not as a crisis, but as a prophetic movement that urges a return to a Jesus-first faith. Scot, welcome to Seek, Go, Create.
Well, thank you very much for this invitation. It's good to be with you.
It's good to have you here too, Scot. I just finished reading Invisible Jesus really just about 30 minutes ago. Enjoy it. Poked at me some, but we'll talk about that in a little while. Then I read Revelation for the rest of us a few weeks ago. We're going to have fun tying some things together. My first question, I'm going to let you pick which question is my first one. Scot, I used to ask the question, what do you do, as sort of an icebreaker and get started. But I've recently started giving people the choice of, would you rather answer the question, what do you do, or who are you? Which question would you prefer to be the first question?
Well, I hope that everybody would want to answer, who are you? I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a teacher. Mostly, I am someone who is indwelt by the Spirit, and I am in Christ. And I've just been reading 1 John, and how we are in God and God is in us, and we are in Christ and Christ is in us, and we are in the Spirit and the Spirit is in us, and love is in us, etc. So that's who I think I am.
That's good. And you are correct that most people are leaning towards answering that, who are you? But I think it takes some people back, depending on business people and all that are used to giving a title. So I appreciate that. And thanks for answering that. I know I've got a boatload of questions here, and I know we're sort of limited to time, but I think I would love to start with asking for a few definitions from you. The first definition kind of revolves around the book Invisible Jesus that just recently released as the time we're recording this. And the big word that you're using there is the word deconstruction. And my observation, Scot, is that there's some people throwing that word around in a lot of different ways. So how do you define deconstruction, or how do we want to frame it for the conversation we're going to have?
In this book, deconstruction refers to shedding elements of a local church's faith or a denomination's faith that were not important to Jesus. We don't use it in the classic philosophical sense that it's the self-destructive dimensions of power claims that can be unmasked by unraveling it, by chasing down its own assumptions. We're using it for the process that believers, Christians, are using to shed elements that they are finding in a church that they think are just not important to Jesus. So that's what we mean by
So
it.
depending on perspective, is it a good word or a bad word?
For us, I don't want to get into the debate with deconstructors or critics of deconstructors of whether it's a good term or a bad term, because for us, it's a real term. It's a term people are using for a process of shedding elements of the faith so they can reconstruct a healthier, Jesus-shaped faith. So for us, it's a term that we use, that we want to listen to the people who use this term for themselves to find out what's going on in the church and with these people's faith.
There seems to be some gasoline that's been poured on this fire recently, or is that just our observation?
I think you're right. I think it's a fresh expression of a term. I was talking to an Old Testament scholar who said, well, the prophets were the original deconstructors. And then Tommy often says, Jesus was a deconstructor. And others would say, John in the book of Revelation is a deconstructor.
Right.
I think that this is true. And the Reformation is an ultimate deconstruction movement. It launched reformanda semper reformanda, always reforming. And if we really believe that the church constantly has to go back to Scripture to see its faithfulness, and if we really believe the church is honest and fair, it will always find dimensions of the faith that need to be shed. So the church should always be deconstructing. But there's a little bit of a trend going on right now with this term, and it pertains to a certain group of people. Now, some people are using it for those who completely walk away from the faith. But our study, we had access to a proprietary study that discovered that 86% of people who use the word deconstruction for themselves remain in the church. So it's not, we're concerned with that 86%. The 14%, I think, would be dealt with in a different way. But we have found the voices of the deconstructors to be prophetic in that they're telling us about some things going on in the church that we need to listen to.
Right. So what's interesting for me, Scott, is that I didn't grow up in or around the church. I got saved at 28 years old is what many would say would be the date. But I did grow up in the southern U.S. Bible Belt culture where people pretty much thought just by association they were Christians. So, and I was also saved in a business setting. So I've actually realized that I just have never liked a lot of what we will call the church was doing. And I'm not anti-church, but I was probably more hypercritical, or I just like going, what are they doing here? What are they talking about? Because it doesn't fit with some things I'm looking for. And so kind of my next, maybe a definition question that kind of came to my mind as I was reading through this book over the last few days is we hear a lot of people, Dallas Willards and people like that talk about spiritual formation. A lot of people in theology schools and things like that. And then we have deconstruction, as y'all talk about it in your book. And to me, from my journey, it seems like there's a relationship there, but could you compare and contrast spiritual formation, people just going through their journey to get closer to Christ or get closer to where they need to be, and then deconstruction where people are kind of walking away from a church world to get closer to Christ? If I worded any of that wrong, correct me, but is there any relation between those two, or am I just trying to make something of nothing?
No, I don't think you are. I knew Dallas Willard a little bit, and I followed his movement, and I know those who were closely associated with him were. And Dallas, I think, would partake in a sense of deconstruction, although as a philosopher, he'd probably want to use the word the way the French deconstructors do, and so he wouldn't say it's part of the church. But he would say that the church needed to be deconstructed in that it wasn't leading people to Christ-likeness, which was sort of his agenda, through the spiritual disciplines. And he's very individualistic in the way he frames the Christian life. It's not very church-centered. So he doesn't do much of the group stuff. But Dallas Willard would say there's a lot of things that go on in the church that are largely a waste of time, and that we would do better having smaller classes and having people ponder more serious issues of gravity. I'm sure he would say that deconstruction is in some ways the heartbeat of what was going on in the spiritual formation movement. Richard Foster, James Bryan Smith. Now, James Bryan Smith is much more oriented toward a local church, but they all focus on individual, personal formation into Christ-likeness. And anything that doesn't move in that direction in a church could very well be wasting our time.
And there's a lot of that going on right now.
I don't quite orient myself toward those categories, but I know that I'm certain that Richard Foster and Dallas Willard would say that very thing. Yeah. I'm not going to speak for James Bryan Smith.
Right.
Because he's so committed to the local church. I don't know what he would say about that.
I wrestle at times internally with my internal criticisms of the local church versus voices in my head and spirit. And it could be, dogma that came from where I grew up of don't mess with that local church. And when I read through Invisible Jesus that you and Tommy wrote, and Tommy is a local pastor, I think we need to mention that.
Yeah, he is.
That y'all still have a heart for that local church body. It's not as if you're trying to throw that out, correct?
That's right. In fact, what we're saying is these deconstructors are not leaving the church. They're leaving a church and largely gravitating toward another church that is more consistent with what they think Jesus wants for his church.
Right.
So in a sense, they're over-committed to the church and willing to abandon churches that they don't think are consistent with what Jesus wants for his people. So yes, we perceive 86% of those committed to the church, and both Tommy and I are committed to the church. Tim, I grew up under the teachings of Francis Schaeffer when I was a college student. And Francis Schaeffer handed on to me some very severe critiques of the American church. So as a college student, I'm 20, 21, 22 years old, and I've got some weapons in my hands because of Francis Schaeffer. And those weapons I was using and peeled off a lot of things in my fundamentalist past. And there were times when I knew a lot more about what I didn't believe than what I did believe. And it took a while. It took me another decade probably to flesh out what I thought the church should be all about. And I'm not saying that we've ever attended a church that lives up to those expectations, but I'm a Bonhoeffer reader, and I know we have to surrender our dreams of what the church could be for what the church actually is. And I've often said you have to lower your expectations of the church to find the fullness of the expectations that we should have.
And there's I think it was chapter 9 in the book that I was so thankful that I got to this place where y'all were talking about what to look for in a pastor or what to look for in leaders, I think was what it was. Because in my mind at times, Scott, I'm thinking, there's really, this is a negative thought, I know, but there's really no one out there to follow. And I think the message is we shouldn't be following men. We should be being more Christ-like. But y'all gave some examples of, I think, some bad traits and then some traits to look for in that chapter.
That's chapter 9.
Yeah, and so I'd love to talk to, because we do have a lot of leaders. We have leaders that are listening in, probably in ministry and business, Scott. So give just some thoughts there. We're going to obviously recommend people read the book, but just give some thoughts about what leaders need to be doing when it comes to either the local church or even, some business guys I think could learn from this. How do they need to be leading in the world we are in today? This will probably be releasing late 2024. People might be listening in 2025. How should leaders that are attempting to be Christ-like how should they be leading?
I think that they should lead from their character. And Tommy is an addict of the fruit of the Spirit, which is a good thing. He often brings in the fruit of the Spirit. So in that very chapter where Tommy is talking, we both wrote this book, what to look for in a pastor, I thought this was really important for him to draft for himself because he's a pastor after all. It's a lot easier for them to listen to one of their own kind, loving and joyful and peaceful and patient and kind and good and faithful and gentle and self-control. That's all from the fruit of the Spirit. But I would reduce this in a sense and gather it all into the bundle of character. When a person has a tov or a good character, they make good decisions. They relate to people in the right way. They pursue a vision that is shaped by goodness rather than by, let's say, success. So I would say that we would say a good pastor is someone who leads from character, and that character ultimately would be Christ-likeness or the fruit of the Spirit or the Beatitudes or following Jesus rather than, let's say, their success, their skills, their preaching ability, their entrepreneurial set, their vision, their enthusiasm, their charisma. And look, Tim, we all know that this is what churches end up finding. They have a big platform. They want someone to fill that platform and make it bigger and bring people to the church, put butts in the pews. Butts in the pews mean bills in the plate. Bills in the plate might mean baptisms in the water. Baptisms in the water might be buildings on the campus. And they see this process, and there is a skill set that can accomplish this, that can be absent or minimal amount of character. And we both believe that we should focus on character and we should be following people of character.
The one thing, I'll just mention something that nags at me and I'll let you respond to it because I don't, and I totally agree with that. But one of the things that bothers me is the systems. I'm a systems guy. I'm an engineer from Georgia Tech. So I look at the structure of what we're doing. And I've often wondered, Scott, if we've created the structures and asked I'm doing air quotes for those listening. If you're watching the video, you say, ask pastors to do some things that are almost impossible for a human individual to do. And let me give you the context for it, and then you could agree, disagree, throw stuff at me, whatever you'd like to do. I've often wondered if to actually pastor someone that it can't be done to scale. It's done in small settings. I mean, the biblical example that I see, there was about 12, maybe a few more, maybe a few less. And I'm wondering if to put 200, 400, 600, 10,000 in an auditorium and say that's a pastor. I mean, are we calling it the wrong thing, or are we structurally wrong? Am I missing something here? What are your thoughts when I bring that up? Are we putting mostly men in position to fail almost immediately?
Okay. I think we put people in positions to succeed at what we want on that platform.
Okay.
All right. So, but that doesn't make them a pastor. What we've created is a platform for someone who has the skill to keep our attention for approximately 45 minutes once a week. And frankly, there are some really good people who can do this. But you cannot pastor 20,000. You cannot pastor 10,000. You cannot pastor 1,000. You can't really pastor much more than, I know 12 is what Jesus has, but that's a little easy to latch on to a number. If you have time and you have presence, I suppose you can pastor 100 to 200 people. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a pastor, but I am in pastoral relations, as it were, as a professor of seminary students with dozens of seminary students who rely on me for wisdom and advice and suggestions. But I'm not truly pastoring them in the sense of mentoring them in the faith. And it is true that you can mentor someone. Some people you can mentor for a year, and they're so skilled as Christians, they grow so quickly that they can kind of move on, and you can just be there and occasionally have conversations over coffee. Others take more work. And so I understand what's going on in churches. Big churches with amazing speakers and amazing performers on the platform with music. I get that. and it draws people in. But that's not pastoring. Pastoring is to nurture a person into Christ-likeness. And nurturing requires presence. It requires relationship. It requires time. I mean, I know lots of these pastors who are on these big platforms that you couldn't get to with an Uzi, with a huge army vehicle blasting down doors. I mean, there's so many layers. I don't understand how that's a pastor, but I do know what preaching is, and that's what we've created in our churches, is platforms for preachers who can bring people into the
a lot of entertainment factor. And I sometimes joke smoke and mirrors when I mean smoke and fog machines, but smoke and mirrors. Our son had a situation. He was at a church in LA, a semi-famous pastor, and he was younger, going through some stuff, and we just kind of recommended, hey, why don't you talk to someone at church? He served on their cleanup team, so he cleaned the bathrooms and all that kind of stuff. Just, hey, you're serving there, you're giving there, go ask one of the assistants. I know you're not going to get to the main guy because he's famous. And even the assistant, which you called hirelings, I think, in the book, but even the assistant, this was the comment they made, and truthfully, it ticked off mom and dad, was my time is not my own. I don't have time to meet with you and have a conversation. And, this was, our son, young man that was going through stuff, probably had questions. Was it deconstructing? I don't know. Might've been, he's gone through a lot of questions and stuff, is a solid young guy. But anyway, I see that, and that grieves me that we have those situations.
It should grieve you. That's the task of a pastor.
Right.
And you shouldn't call yourself a pastor. When students come to me, Tim, I get students who are thinking about becoming pastors too. I used to get more of them when I was teaching undergrads, but they'll come to me, do you think I should be a pastor? And I always ask this question: who are you pastoring right now? And who considers you their pastor? Because if both of those answers are nobody and nobody, then you're not a pastor. Pastoring is not a job. It's a calling. And I know a lot of pastors, and they pastor people. They pastor everybody they talk to. And it's the way they are. That's the gift that God has given them. So I'm totally with you. I think we got a massive problem in creating platforms that attract charismatic personalities, lots of whom are narcissists, who can really entertain. I wouldn't even reduce it to entertainment. They're just really gifted speakers, and they can pull it off. I mean, I love to listen to Andy Stanley. I really do. I'd sit and stop and listen to Andy Stanley. And I know he pastors people on the staff, people around him. I know him well enough to know that. But you can't pastor the massive audience that he has. But there aren't very many people who have those kind of speaking skills that can hold an audience like that. I mean, that's really quite a gift. And it's unfortunate that little churches are just pouring all their people into these big churches, in part because the local pastor can't perform the way that those megachurch people can.
Right. It was. I'm going to shift a little bit and maybe look more at this. Circle back to the deconstruction topic and some of the reasons for it. And it was good for me. I think I was able to read your revelation for the rest of us a few weeks ago. It seems to me like some of the big questions that come up, and maybe this is part of the results of this 86%, this study that y'all were able to get access to. It seems as if there are two big topics that are kind of driving people to have questions that individuals need to answer, and then also leaders need to answer. And this is, I think, one of the calls you have in the book is to those leaders. But it seems like there's that in the beginning question, we'll call it like creation, And then there's in the end questions, which is, death and what's happening, eschatology and things like that. Those seem like two of the big themes that are causing questions. And then there's some sub ones that we'll talk about a little, like politics and, things that are going on with systems in the world and all that. Would that be accurate? And I think y'all addressed some of those when I was reading through the book.
No. Tim, we've listened to a lot of these stories, and we haven't really done any demographic of what causes people to go into a crisis and start deconstructing. So I tend, I don't know that those are the two most important, but those are two important ones. And we're happy to talk about those. Creation science, I mean, I taught undergrads for 17 years, and I taught Introduction to the Bible. And when you do Introduction to the Bible, you do Genesis 1. And when you have science students in the room, they're listening. They want to know what you think. And I've had plenty of students who over the years told me they grew up with a certain kind of creation science, and they have studied enough biology and the history of, let's say, the genome and genetic DNA, et cetera, that they're not so persuaded of this young earth creationism stuff. But the problem is that it gets tied to a group that believes this. It gets tied to inerrancy, and then it becomes authoritative. And then all of a sudden, if you don't believe that, you're rejected, and you go through a crisis. What's wrong with me? I'm part of this group anymore. So creation science is one of the major issues, and it doesn't usually stand alone. In my lifetime, I've seen people be able to evangelize successfully on the basis of the question. I think it was James Kennedy's question. If you had to meet God tonight and died, what would be your reason for God admitting you to heaven? That's the ultimate eschatological question, is what happens when you die, and will you go to heaven? I saw in the early 2000s that this question just disappeared from a massive segment of American churches and Christians. They weren't asking that question anymore. So that ultimate eschatological question died out. I don't believe we should end that question, because if eternity is real, I think we ought to be ready for it. But at the same time, those are two questions. A lot of deconstructors are deeply bothered by the fact that of some Calvinists who think there are very, very few people who will be saved in all of Iran and all of Iraq and all of Russia and all of China. And then all of a sudden you start thinking, you mean the whole world is going to hell except just a few Presbyterians in the United States and in Denmark, in the Netherlands? And you think, there's something wrong here that we need to rethink. And so that is a major issue. And we usually see it in a version where people start talking about hell, that they're really bothered by how Christians frame the doctrine of hell. So those are two very significant issues that what we have seen is it precipitates a crisis of people thinking, do I believe this? And if I don't believe this, what's going to happen to me with the group of Christians that I worship with? What's going to happen in my own family? What's going to happen to my leadership at church? As a pastor, am I going to lose my job? Am I going to lose my income? Where are we going to live, and what am I going to do? Those are questions that are immediately precipitated when people begin to deconstruct. And we want a world in which people can ask those questions.
Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of our structures don't allow that. That kind of opens the door. I just want to ask a question or two related to I think you called them dissident disciples in your book, Revelation for the Rest of Us. Yep. And the reason it's kind of pertinent for me, Scott, is I'm approaching 40 years as a follower of Christ, feel as if I've been growing and learning and all the whole time. And unfortunately now at 60, I feel like I know less than I knew. And the good thing, I'm not, embarrassed to say that. There's more there. But I realized that I had a baked in dispensationalist mindset. And the thing I liked about that book was that you spent a good bit of time sort of busting up that, we'll call it the dogma of dispensationalism. I don't know if that's a good term or not, but we'll
Fair enough.
say that. And just a question or two about that. Why is that just that one theological mindset? Why is it dangerous? And how does it relate to your new book, Invisible Jesus, and people going through some deconstruction, if at all? If I'm trying to match something up here, you could say, don't worry about it.
Why is it dangerous? Okay. A lot of people are dispensationalists. And I would say the instinct of American evangelicals of a non-reformed bent, okay? The reformed people tend to be post-millennial or at least amillennial. But the other part are more or less dispensational. And there is a broad range of people who have dispensational instincts, some of whom are really detailed, way too detailed, and they know that Putin's the Antichrist, those sort. And there's others who are just sort of dispensational. That's what their instincts are, but they don't think about it very much. I think the biggest problem that dispensationalism handed on to the American church, and Tim, I don't want to deny this, it's huge. The impact is everywhere. Most people in most evangelical churches have dispensational instincts, is that we have because of dispensationalism, we have no theopolitical discipleship in the church. Now, what I mean by that is our discipleship has not taught us how to think politically in a theological manner to understand leadership in the world, political powers, how government works, how it relates to the church. There's just so little of this. And it's almost like whatever America does is good because we're the best nation in the world. And therefore, our support of Israel and our paying for bombs to beat the daylights out of Gaza, our support of Ukraine, and maybe that's going to end now, that's okay. There's just no reflection. Christians just go, well, that's the government, that's their job, and we support the government. I think that the book of Revelation was written for an entirely different purpose. It taught people, the believers of the 7 churches in Western Asia Minor, how to think politically about Rome. And we get a beautiful template. Now, we're not going to apply everything. In the vision of especially Revelation 17, 18, a little bit of 19, on how the apocalypse describes Rome. And it is powerful critique, prophetic, and it teaches believers. And there aren't very many of them, but John somehow thinks there's going to be an innumerable number of believers in the final kingdom of God, which is LOL moment for those little house churches in Ephesus and Pergamum, is that he's teaching them how to look at Rome in a completely different way and to follow Jesus as the Lord, because someday the kingdom of God is going to be on earth. And that's what we look forward to. So now, deconstruction. I have found, this is, I can't gather together all the deconstructors and hand them Revelation for the rest of us that I wrote with Cody Matchett and say, now, what do you think? But Tommy preaches on this. He has preached for about a year on Revelation, and he's got really good sermons. And he knows that these deconstructors love this vision of the book of Revelation because it gives them a hermeneutic of prophetic resistance to political powers that run the world astray and that create injustices. So I really believe that that revelation for the, you're the first person who's asked this question. I think revelation for the rest of us is a recipe for the soul for the deconstructors. I think they like that.
I think so too. And I hate to put timestamps on these, but you and I are recording this 4 days after the U.S. elections in November. I'm not sure when exactly they were released, but and it kind of framed my mind when I was reading through Deconstruction. And what I realized is that I believe with reading those two books, election conversation, and wherever side people on kind of is irrelevant to me. I realize that I'm actually deconstructing in my mind many things that are in what I'll call our Babylonian system, because I'm almost deconstructing government, what I think about work, what I think about money, definitely church, as we talked about earlier. Some people even, family. I mean, to me, it seems like there's just a lot of deconstructing going on. And, there's no data on that, but it seems like that's kind of what's happening, and the political environment is no different. Would that be, I don't know, accurate? Or
I totally agree with you. And I know Tommy would agree with you. Yes, there is deconstruction of all these. Capitalism, work, how work is constructed, family life is constructed, how housing is developed, wage, economic, immigration, all these things are up for grabs. The deconstructors are saying, if Jesus and the kingdom of God is the center of the vision of God for this world, then we ought to be pursuing those things rather than how to, let's say, aggrandize the power of the United States, or aggrandize the power of our political party, or aggrandize the power of our church versus another church in the neighborhood. They see that and they think this is just completely backward and upside down and wrong. And so, yeah, they see in the book of Revelation all the themes that could be connected to invisible Jesus.
Is it possible, Scott? I mean, I love the subtitle of Invisible Jesus, a book about leaving the church and looking for Christ. So this is kind of like maybe a little bit of a softball to you, maybe not, I don't know. Is it possible that we're getting to the place where many of us, many people, individuals are realizing there really is only one place to go? And it's towards Jesus.
Oh, yeah. One person.
One person.
That's right. I thought you meant one church. Okay.
No.
Which one you talking about here?
One government. Yeah. It's like, no. What political party? It's only one political party. Which party is it, Scott? Tell us. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I think, yes, every church, every person who goes to a church should walk away saying, when I was there today, I saw Jesus. They should not walk away saying, that's a great pastor, or that's a beautiful piece of music. Those things are all fine to say. But if they come away and they did not encounter Jesus, the church has failed. So, yeah, there's one place, one person to go to, it's Jesus. And those who gather to Jesus want to be in fellowship with one another. That's where church theology starts.
Mm-hmm.
And being around Jesus, listening to him.
Yeah. And the message of this book, Invisible Jesus, is, to me, more Jesus. Jesus is the answer. So anyway, I recommend the book. I think it's a great book. It got me thinking. There were times that I recognized some of my dogmas, and I'm okay to admit that, but I highly recommend it. One quick question before we wrap up here, Scott. I know you have to jump off, but you've written 90 books. Good gracious, that's a lot of books. Any of it that would need to be changed or adjusted? I'm sitting here thinking over the course of 40 years, like what We're all on a journey. Any of your journey cause you to go back and revisit something? And we don't have to go deep on this, but just curious.
Oh yeah. Every book I totally live with the reality that when I write a book, it's connected to the world in which I live at that time. And so, for instance, I was looking at my little NIV application commentary on Galatians recently, and I liked my exposition. And then I looked at they called it application at that time. I went, oh, I wouldn't talk about that today. So yes, but that's the nature of writing. We learn and we grow and we develop, and things that we said 30 years ago are not things that we would say today. I think my exegesis of Galatians is, for me, it's rock solid. I still pretty much adhere to all of that. But the world to which I would speak that is a different world than I did at that time.
Yeah.
So, yes. And I'll tell you one book that I loved writing. It's called Embracing Grace. That book was totally reframed and dismantled by a book called King Jesus Gospel. And I was exploring how best to talk about the gospel. And I wrote Embracing Grace, and I like the idea of grace, but it wasn't Jesus-centered enough, and King Jesus Gospel did that. So I never recommend people to read Embracing Grace.
Final question. I know you need to jump. We're seek, go, create, Scott. Those three words. You can probably guess where the origins of some of those are. I'm going to allow you to choose one of those as just my final question. Which do you choose that just resonates currently with you more than the other? Seek, go, or create, and why?
Well, that's a good question. Create. I believe that God in Christ is recreating us to a new life. And I want to participate. I want to be involved in the work of God in my own life. I want God to do that. And I want to participate with others in the recreation of gospel grace life in our world today. And God is the actor who can make this happen. So I think that answers your question.
Excellent. It does. I'm sure the books are available where everybody can get books, correct? Invisible Jesus right here. Got it on my iPad. Not my iPad, my Kindle.
I have it.
Yeah, there's a hard copy. Man, that looks good. I like that black cover. That looks nice there.
It's so clever because the letters Invisible Jesus are black as well, but they're risen slightly above.
In the Kindle, cool. I noticed there's a fading of the invisible there. That's cool.
Yeah, they're fading in the color version too. So this is a good cover. Yeah,
that is really, really cool. That one would jump out. Well, anyway, thank you, Scott.
And thank you. And in spite of the fact that you're a part of the rambling wreck of Georgia Tech.
What is wrong with that? That's a plus right there, isn't it?
My parents lived in Atlanta, but I don't think they were big fans of Georgia Tech at the time.
Were they Georgia people? Hopefully not.
No, they're from Illinois.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Scott. I appreciate it. Make sure you get a copy of the book, Invisible Jesus. I also think Revelation for the Rest of Us is an excellent book to add to it. It will get you thinking. There's no doubt about it. We have new episodes every Monday here at Seek, Go, Create. Love to hear comments. If you're watching this on YouTube, down in the comments, let me know what you think about these topics. If you're listening on your audio, that's great too. Share this with other people. And I'd also ask you, if you love what we're bringing you, if you love this content, then support us. Go to seekgocreate.com/support, seekgocreate.com/support, and you can leave a tip or contribute financially or leave comments about what we're doing here. That would be greatly appreciated. So again, thanks for listening. Until next time, continue being all that you were created to be.